In 1995, history was made. The World Summit for Social Development in Copenhagen united world leaders around a groundbreaking commitment to put people at the center of development. They pledged to eradicate poverty, promote social integration, and achieve full and productive employment for all. Over the years, this commitment transformed into action. The Millennium Development Goals set a global agenda for poverty eradication, health, and education. The Sustainable Development Goals envisioned a just and sustainable world. The Pact for the Future reaffirmed global solidarity for current and future generations. In 3 decades, progress has been remarkable. Extreme poverty has been reduced by half. Digital transformation has revolutionized access to services, empowering millions and fostering inclusion. More children, especially girls, are in school. Breakthroughs in global health have increased life expectancy and tackled diseases like HIV/AIDS. But challenges remain. Inequalities in income, education, health, and opportunity persist. A digital divide excludes millions. People living in vulnerable situations such as older persons, indigenous peoples, and persons with disabilities face barriers. As we approach the second World Summit for Social Development in 2025, the world must renew its commitment to inclusive social development. Together, we can achieve equal opportunities for all, resilient and sustainable societies, a truly inclusive world where everyone is included.
It's great to have a sense of some of those top-line issues, which is really going to inform the discussion that we are having today. But first, let's take a look at that poll so we can get a sense of who is in the audience for today's conversation and where you are joining us from around the world. So almost half of us are from North America, but we do have a strong contingent who are up very late. Those in Asia and the Pacific right now, we thank you for being up so early or so late, depending on where you are. A great cross-section of folks joining us today. So welcome to all of you. For everyone who's just joined, please don't forget to go to slido.com, slido.com, put in the hashtag SDGs, and you'll be able to join in the conversation virtually as well. Send through your questions and participate in the various polls that we'll be having as the conversation goes along today. But let's jump into the discussion, which is, I know, why all of you have given up your precious time to be here today. So thank you. We're going to be discussing today social inclusion as an accelerator for the SDGs. And a very warm welcome to the panelists who are sitting next to me today. I'm very happy to introduce to you Tatiana Molzian, the Executive Director of the UN Economic Commission for Europe. Welcome to you. Thank you so much for being here with us. Sabina Alkir is the Director of Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative at the Oxford University. She's also a member of the UN Committee for Development Policy. A big welcome to you. Thank you so much for being here. And Dr. Purva Patil is a medical doctor and feminist surgeon in training. She's also on the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. Very happy to have you with us today. And virtually, we have a guest as well. Also, warm welcome to Parfait Alon-Duanege, the Professor of Global Development and Brooks School of Policy at Cornell University. He's also a member of the UN High-Level Advisory Board on Economic and Social Affairs. Delighted to have you with us as well, Professor. Thank you so much for being here. So let's dive into the discussion. And I want to really kick us off today talking about trust. We know that it's declining and that a huge portion of the population has lost trust in governments. Executive Secretary, I'd like to start with you. What role do universal social protections and education systems actually play in strengthening social cohesion and public trust?
Thank you, and thank you for diving directly into the discussions and with this question. I would just like to start by saying that we have just seen this nice video playing where we have seen the progress, but if we are looking to the reality that we have these days, it's really, we have a sobering reality in a certain way. And first of all, it's that progress is uneven. Yes, and in many places it's stalling. Trust is really one of the key issues, but many people around the world feel excluded from the benefits of development. And somehow UNICE and the region that I represent, so it's Europe, but also it's North America. So countries from US, Canada are also members of the UNICE. We see that this is a region that, of course, is where there is considerable wealth and also innovation, but also very deep and growing disparities between urban and rural areas, generations, and different groups. In the UNICE region, we see that there is declining access to affordable housing and energy with the labor markets, and also we see that there are unmet care needs of aging populations. Now, you have asked also about the social protection system. Yes, there are concerns, but this is still our strongest tool for economic and security and social cohesion. It's really a safety net. It's more than a safety net, I would say, than against poverty. Because it really empowers people to participate and to engage in the society and in the economy. And this is really something that we have to work on, social inclusion and economic inclusions, which shouldn't be seen as separate. They are part of the same, I would say, these are not two sides, this is the same coin, I would say even on the same side of this coin. Yes. We, in our region, again, if I'm relating to what we have, we see that labor markets are increasingly polarized. So this is one of the challenge. So we have many people stuck in low paid and insecure and informal jobs. Youth unemployment is raising. That's another concern that we have. That's why what we need is really to have active labor market policies linked with inclusive education system, training and reskilling initiative. Reskilling, I would like to keep this in mind, and that's a very, but also targeted support to disadvantaged groups. Also minimum wage guarantees. And legislation that protects workers in this process, and this is this trust had been eroded in recent decades as people have really felt the social contract fraying, basically, with this inequalities, more precarious unemployment, and with essential social services under threat. So this is what we have to target and to work on specifically. So if that answers that, I'll come back later on more details. Okay.
Could we dive into some of the details quickly? You mentioned people feeling excluded from the policies, that rising disparity, but you also mentioned, something really interesting about the reskilling. Are there any examples of programs that you can speak to, or countries, member states that are doing particularly well that we can actually learn from?
There are several. Yes, it's working. I'm sorry. On the reskilling, it's a reality that we are all facing now, including on the use of new technologies and AI. So this is a program that has been launched in many of our countries. I wouldn't like to name only a few. Why? Because then it would mean that we are excluding some and not doing. But this is basically that we have been working on how to take in consideration the realities of the digital progress or technological progress. This is we are working, partnering not only with the governments, but first of all also with the educational system. So with the not only, let's say, ministries or government responsible for social policies, but educational system is really the key here in addressing this challenge. We will have, this is in a way, our task now is how to make this as painless as possible, this transitioning, but also reskilling of those who have been, who are already on the market, on the labor market. And UNICE region, with a few exceptions, has an aging population. So this is one of the major concerns that we have. How do we address the reskilling or the potential to reskill those who have, let's say, not the young or the youth who are only exceeding the market. We have two different challenges in this case. And there are separate programs that we work on, so both with the, let's say, older population, but also with the young that have just completed their, let's say, educational program. But we see that this is no match for the market, if we are being very frank. Unfortunately, the educational system depends on the educational system, but the educational system doesn't follow as fast the market, if I can say, the needs of the market. It's very uneven depending on the country's educational system. So this is where we need to work together, and we work together, for example, with colleagues also from not only DESA, for example, UNESCO is a key partner to address these challenges on how we make sure exactly that all of these aspects are taken in consideration. A minimal support that we can address is at least to study and to be aware about these realities and informing the governments when they make the policies in the sector. Here's where I see our role particular to indicate and to support and to guide in at least making this basic assessment on the what is needed and making this future foresight projections on the policies that will be needed.
Really appreciate that. I want to bring in Professor Alondu Anyege, who's joining us virtually. Professor, I would love your thoughts, specifically building off the back of what the Executive Secretary said. What are you seeing happening in the Africa region? Because I know that you're very passionate about that transition process when people enter the workforce. So I would love your expertise to enter the discussion now.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm happy to join you, Maggie. I'm happy to join all the participants in New York and across the world. Just to say the first word, and social protection. I think as a general principle, people are going to trust you if you are fair. So what is true on an interpersonal level is also going to be true of societies. Mm-hmm. And so I think strong mechanisms of social protection are the clearest demonstration that you can find, that you can give citizens that the state is present, that is competent, and that is committed to inclusion. And there's robust evidence from across the social sciences, whether it's in psychology or behavioral economics or evolutionary biology, that we as humans are social animals that put a premium, a very strong premium on fairness. Fairness, in fact, and inclusion are very strong prerequisite if you hope to have any society that is viable, whether from an economic or social political lens. And so we want to be convinced as citizens that what we're going to get in life is not driven by birth, where we were born, who we were born to, but what we achieve. And therefore, there's an interest in devising protection mechanisms that make sure that everybody starts from the same starting line. You know, from birth, we have to have a relatively level playing field, which is why prenatal care, early childhood nutrition, access to basic education are important. And now to speak to the transition that you have in mind, which is the transition into work, is actually becoming a very important element too in that trust building and inclusion, because increasingly you have massive levels of youth unemployment and enormous differences in the opportunities to enter the labor market for young adults who are completing their education. And so the challenge now is to make sure that you give these young adults, these adolescents, similar opportunities to get a foothold in the labor market, but also have a healthy transition into adulthood. Now, how to do this is a big challenge. The needs are enormous, but there are great possibilities. And here the state has to play a very, very important role. In the past, there has been a debate as to whether the state should be sort of a marginal player versus a strong player with a very deep intervention. And even among those who support state intervention, there's been a tendency to think of the state mostly as an economic actor. If you think about the theories of the developmental state, it's really about stimulating growth. If you think about theories of the entrepreneurial state, it's about creating market and innovation. What I have in mind, what I would actually suggest is to think about an avuncular state, which is the state not only intervening in the economic sphere, but also in the social sphere, the state providing a solution that can help mentoring, in addition to just providing economic opportunity, mentoring and corralling this cohort of youth into a sort of a healthy adulthood.
Really appreciate that insight. I want to come to you in a second, Professor Alkir, but just Dr. Patil, if I can jump to you for a second, because off the back of what Professor mentioned earlier, I wonder if you have thoughts on this, given the work that you do, particularly representing a lot of young people in the work that you do, and also in this discussion. Like, what are your thoughts about the importance of that mentoring piece that we just heard about?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, first and foremost, for having me here and speak on this very important issue. With the fear of repeating what's already been said by both of our speakers, I think first we should really start with addressing how having an educational degree doesn't really make you self-sufficient in today's world. It doesn't guarantee success. And in a world like this, having any form of mentorship is really a privilege. And does it have a role in essentially guiding how to navigate this complex world of so many difficulties, where your intersectionalities or where your vulnerabilities are such a hindrance in leading to where you're eventually trying to go in your career, is extremely important. So when you talk about mentorship, I don't want to spend time or take this time that I have to talk about how important it is in a young person's life. I think that's understood. But what I would like to bring in this conversation is how, despite how important it is and how much value it adds to a young person's life, I think we should start talking about how there is actually such little support in finding these mentorship opportunities and finding these systems that can make this process of navigating through these complexities, even in your professional life, that much easier. And I think as a woman, more so, it's even more difficult. So having a strong woman mentor, a strong mentor, has been more critical for me than having any other form of support in advancing in my career. So that's to speak to the importance of that.
And I'm going to come back to it in a second, but Professor Alkir, I'd love to get your input. You were very instrumental in developing the multidimensional poverty index. And I would love if you could share with us today some of the poverty metrics that actually back up which policies we should be focusing on, right, to best address these intersecting inequalities across gender, health, income, geography. We could speak about this for days probably, but I'd love your sort of top line thoughts on this.
Yes, so the movie we saw at the beginning mentioned the SDG Agenda 2030, the Pact for the Future, the World Summit, Second World Summit on Social Development, even COP30. And all of them recognize that reducing poverty is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement of sustainable development. So my question is, how do you action that? How do I action that? How have countries actioned that? In Copenhagen, one of the takeaway points is that it's cheaper to address different aspects of poverty together. It's like bowling, and you can hit several pins with one policy, and we want to all bowl and get our strikes. So what that means is that we want to know who's deprived in many things at the same time. I work on multidimensional poverty, which is a sister to monetary poverty, but it looks at people who are deprived in work, in health, in nutrition, in living standards, in violence, and sees who's deprived in several of these at the same time and exactly how. So what are countries doing when they have this information? In Nepal, they found that the poorest regions were not necessarily the poorest by monetary poverty. So they could reallocate and support them. In Panama, they found that the indigenous comarcas were much poorer. Over 90% of people there were poor, whereas in Panama City, it was 8%. That wasn't the case for income. So again, they knew where to put the money and what to do. In Vietnam, there's a poverty census of 25 million people. They know the addresses of the poor people. With ethical priorities, they can focus and door to door on providing the scholarships, the access to healthcare, the access to infrastructure like roads and transport that people need. So when you have these data, you can act better and with less money. Another is, let's say you have $100,000 to invest in poverty. What do you do? If you have no data, you might give it to somebody. But in Costa Rica, they looked at their budget and they looked at the face of poverty measured through their multidimensional poverty index, and they realized they weren't investing in the indicators poor people needed. So they didn't increase their budget, they shifted it around, and they knew where to put their money. That was by a presidential decree of Luis Guillermo in 2016, but it accelerated poverty reduction on a fixed budget. Another is management. I don't know how many people here or online are going into business or management, but you've heard of KPIs, key performance indicators. A multidimensional poverty measure like that of Colombia has 15 indicators. They put that as a key performance indicator dashboard. They worked with McKinsey, with Bobber Deliverology, and they had red, yellow, green. How are you doing on your indicator this year? And that was presented to the 9 ministers and the President of the Republic. And they had a little bit of extra money. And if it was red, if it was stuck, then they came together as a team of leaders focused on poverty and said, what can we do to unblock this bottleneck and accelerate reduction? So it became a shared problem, not one lone minister feeling depressed and worried. So the last point I want to make is more emotional. As Tatiana said, these are sobering times. Poverty is going up, it's stagnating. But when we are very overwhelmed, then sometimes we get depressed and we don't act. So we also try to find stories of success. Oaxaca, the second poorest state in Mexico, reduced poverty the fastest of any state from 2016 to 2022. It hadn't done that before. It was by Alejandro, the governor, Yolanda, the young minister of social development, and their team using data and policy. India got 415 million people out of poverty in 15 years. So finding encouraging stories and talking about them does two things. It gives us hope that we could do that where we are, because if this is the greatest priority, we have to all work on it. And second, it makes us know who we should learn from. And it gives an incentive, because if you know you'll be recognized, then we want to care about poverty because of the ethical importance, but we also need to recognize there's a professional benefit to doing so. So that's our hope, is we can use metrics to really drive practical change and encourage other people in so doing.
I love the example you gave of the reallocation. It's a great visual for all of us to think about as we continue this conversation. Thank you. Dr. Patil, you've spoken publicly, and you have a great TED talk on this as well, about some of the challenges that you had growing up. Given your experience, I wonder what wisdom you'd like to share with policymakers to best and most quickly bridge some of these intersecting inequalities.
Thank you for that question. I think it's a very packed question, but I will try to answer it the best I can. The first thing is recognizing that our problems are actually, like, it is one thing to say that we have multidimensional problems and we need intersectional approaches, but what does that translate to when I'm in a grassroots healthcare center sitting across my patient? So I think a lot of our policies are essentially disconnected from the people they're designed to serve. And that is a good starting point to have this conversation. Unfortunately for us, while we have 17 SDGs, it's not as if a poor person, because they have one SDG problem, does not have another SDG that impacts them. So a poor person could also be somebody that has a lot of health issues. So, but what we have done is we have taken these structures that were initially designed to make it easier to monitor progress, to sort of stick into them in boxes. So when I sit in my hospital, uh, if I see a woman, which is so often the case, that has walked 12 kilometers or 13 kilometers to come to the hospital in need for surgery that she should have gotten 5 years ago but could not because of social neglect, because of issues of not being able to come to these hospitals. I often wonder, we have programs, but we're still failing. And the only reason that is happening is because we're thinking of things in different boxes and verticals. We're not thinking of them collectively. To talk from my personal experience of growing up as a child of a single mother back in India in the 1990s and early 2000s, I think the difficulties that you grow up with are often not even discussed in spaces like these, and that's so disappointing on so many levels. Secondly, I'm a very firm believer of the fact that young people, especially those that are at the center of these different issues, are also the closest to delivering these solutions. And a lot of these different initiatives and a lot of these different projects and programs that we have across the globe are so often treated as supplements to progress than guiding drivers of it. And I think that really needs to change. What we are doing is we are seeing one generation fail, the other generation comes and fails, but we really need to sit together collectively in an intersectional, intergenerational room of people that are truly at the face of these problems and not disconnected from them, to come with solutions that can actually push the needle forward.
I appreciate that. And I actually would love to bring in Professor Ilondu Nyage on this as well, because I know that you share a similar belief that actually it is young people who in large part are going to drive this change. I wonder if you could share with us some of the experiences that you've had through the work and the research that you've been doing, but also through the not-for-profit that you run in Africa as well.
Yes, I hear many interesting stories from the room, stories of hope, stories of efficiency, and stories of intergenerational connections. For the sake of ground truthing a lot of the research that I do, I have started a nonprofit that I've worked with over the last 12 years, and it was really focused on youth at the transition from education to work so that I can get to see what practical solutions appear to work. And so both the research that I've been doing, but also the daily contact with these youth and their daily struggles actually added to what I can see. And based on what I've seen so far, there are a few lessons that I can share. And the two that I would like to emphasize are about the strategic importance of the youth as a lever to bridge inequality. Why should we pay attention to youth, and especially to African youth? Number one, it's really something that is known, but it's worth reminding. This is a critical life stage where everything is going to turn. There's a tendency to think about inequality in terms of the places to go or the people to think about, but there's also another perspective in which you want to think about the moments in the life course where we should actually pay attention. And I think late adolescence and early adulthood is a pivot moment where the choices that you're going to make can steer you in one direction versus the other. If you think about all the choices that are made at that stage, whether about the choice of your education, your career, your migration, your relationship, marriage, mobility, spatial mobility, etc., risk-taking, lifestyle, consumer behavior, all of these the choices are crystallized or initiated during that period. And it goes very, very fast. And so if we pay attention to that stage, we actually have the opportunity to address a variety of outcomes, whether they are economic, health, or otherwise. We have a chance to have an impact that is going to be not only cross-cutting, but also longer term. If you invest in youth that are now making these key decisions, you stand to reap the benefit for the next 40 years or so, during which they're going to live, and also acknowledging that they're going to be the parents of the next generation. So I think my greatest advocacy in this group is really to think more seriously about the strategic importance of this group. In Africa in particular, this is a group that is going to be, we have what we call a youth bulge, which is we're going through a moment where this cohort of youth is going to be the largest it will ever be. And it's also becoming increasingly the epicenter of the youth demographics. Today, African youth represent about a quarter of the world's, the total world's youth in the world. By the middle of the century, in 2050, they're going to be 1/3 of all the youth in the world. And at the turn of the century, it's going to be a full half of all the youth in the world. And so what we do in Africa, what we do with youth in Africa today is critically decisive for the entire world. And I think the attention and the policy resources are not commensurate with what I see as just the strategic importance of that subpopulation.
Questions coming through as well on Slido, so please keep your questions coming through. We're going to get to those in just a second. Slido.com/SDGs, and you can send your questions through, upvote the other questions that folks are sending through as well. But Executive Secretary, we sort of heard about, you know, the importance of tracking success. We heard about the importance of the youth intersection and their perspective being truly valued. I wonder as well, like, how do global conflicts going on right now impact perhaps how we should shift course? And what role do partnerships play in this journey that we're all on together towards 2030?
I think when it comes to partnerships, this is the key role. To conflicts, frankly, that's something that impacts overall the development as a process. When we see that funds are being deviated from development to defense, best case scenario, or rearmament. So that, I would say, is the biggest challenge that we see, that funds that are very much needed for this, for social care, for different incentives are diverted. But the partnerships, this is the key word. And I was listening, you know, about the youth, the discussions. What I fear most, that we all agree youth is very important, and then we create a separate platform for the youth, you know, and the youth is discussing in their own, you know, group about how they contribute, and that this goes to discussions in the government, or in the UN, any other platform. So it's very important not to make this mistake, and we constantly do it in this partnership. So we create the specialized group for everyone so that we work together. I think you mentioned from the beginning about this, that it's much more efficient if we work together rather than each one individual. So this is the key message. It has to be together, whatever levels we are talking, youth, private sector as well, which is a key element in all of these discussions. But I would like to add also to the previous, some of the comments and some of the things that I mentioned before. For everything that we are discussing, there are 3 key measures or solutions plus 1. The first solution, and I would like to reinforce the message again from you, Professor, about the need to have the data, and how I would even say we should make it mandatory without having the data, not to do anything before you have, and you have a multidimensional and multi-metrics assessment. Otherwise, all the funding is, best case scenario, less efficient, worst case scenario, and the reality is just wasted resources. So that is the additional. But we have 3 elements, and that is the hard part is legislation. We need very strong legislation in countries, and I speak from the experience from our region. We see countries with strong legislation really helps on the ground when it comes to addressing inequalities. And inequalities, this is a sector that we can target through adequate regulatory measures. when we speak, for example, I was earlier mentioning the older people, and particularly women are at higher risk of poverty and social isolation. So we can introduce, or for example, also the disabled people. So by introducing mandatory standard legislative or regulatory approaches, we can really combat some of this. Then the second part or second type of measures, these are of course incentives. They play an important role, but it's more difficult. Reskilling, I cannot promote reskilling through hard legislative pieces. It doesn't work. We do plans, we agree what would be the, but this is through incentives. And in these incentives, we have to attract all partners to work together. And the third element, investment. So hard legislation, incentives for different and investments. And I think here where we can talk more and see how we attract investment by showing that investing in social development is actually economically an advantage. It's more efficient. You solve a lot of things. We had a very good discussion around this, not very detailed, in the at the FFD earlier this month in Seville. But I'm really hoping that in Qatar also later on we will look specifically how we attract investment. This is key, and partnerships are key because we'll need not only the civil society, the youth, the different, but the private sector would be key, in particular when we talk, for example, about public-private partnerships. So this is my solution. It's easy. We just need to do it.
The easy solution. Alkia, I wonder, do you want to build on that easy solution that we just heard then, especially that piece around the private-public partnership piece, and what your research has found in this space as well?
Yeah, first, two quick numbers on children and on conflict. With UNDP, we partner and co-publish a global multidimensional poverty index that covers 112 countries and 6.3 billion people using health, education, and living standards indicators. And the most recent data show that 1.1 billion people are poor, and half of them have not celebrated their 18th birthday with candles and milk or whatever you had at your 18th birthday. But yes, it's their children. And so that's quite a sobering fact, but it means that it's both that children are agents of change and children are also priority groups for investment. Second, on conflict, using the Uppsala data on wars, the fragile and conflict affected situations data from the World Bank, and the low or very low peace data from the Global Peace Index, we found that 40% of all poor people live in situations of conflict. And so that these are really interconnected now. And so these solutions need also to come together. And the former president and Nobel Peace Prize laureate from Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos, in fact, wrote a book on the battle against poverty, where he showed how in Colombia they used poverty investments as part of the road towards peace there. The final thing in terms of the private sector is that there are different ways the private sector invest. In Colombia, the president of the republic invited the CEOs of 39 companies to come with him to the field and to don the blue vests of the grassroots field workers and to go door to door with a clipboard and find out which deprivations from Colombia's MPI they experienced. That was the first face-to-face encounter many of them had. And they didn't only recognize the hardships, but also the dreams and the beauty and the determination of impoverished people. So that personal link can be motivational. But second, many businesses then now have taken up their multidimensional poverty measure and done it within their businesses. So they know who's poor, and then they invest with ethical protocols of privacy in their own workforce, so that poor people within their workforce are able to leave poverty, and that improves retention of staff, motivation of staff. So it's good business, but it's also reduces the national MPI using their own resources, and then some go further down the value chain. So I think there are different, very tangible ways the private sector can engage. If I have time for one story about youth.
Sure. We have 30 seconds for you before we get to questions.
Okay.
Go for it.
In one country that I won't name, a big country, I was attacked by a young man who had just finished his degree, and he wanted to do a multidimensional poverty index in the state. And the head of the state had invited and hired a few youth to do something new. And so he actually came to where I was, flew over there, we had lunch and a walk. and gave him the questions. I thought nothing of it. He went back and he did it.
Wow.
And then he did a measure for his state. And then the head of the state released it. And we saw it in the newspaper, to my shock. And then I was here at HLPF, and he was here in his country's thing with his prime minister presenting it. And then his country adopted it, and he went to work in the UN and in the country office. So it is little people who can be catalytic. If they have drive, if they're determined, it could be anybody in this room or online. You could be, the change. And like Tatiana said, you don't need to be segmented. Just take your work and drive it forward with passion and persistence and really good quality. And people will notice. And I hope that that's done a lot for poverty going forward.
What a great reminder that all of us can be a catalyst for change. I really, it's amazing. I know we have a lot of questions, so please keep sending them through on Slido, but I believe we have someone who would like to ask a question in person. If you'd like to stand up, we have time for one question. Whoever of you two would like to, you had your hand up first, so if you'd like to ask your question for the panel, we have 30 seconds, so if you can keep it brief, we would appreciate you.
Yeah, so my name is Michael Lee Honda. I'm 15 years old, speaking on behalf of the Whitestone Legislative Advocacy, a youth-led nonpartisan legal institution, advancing anti-corruption and civic accountability policy within the United States congressional space and international bodies such as the United Nations. And we also serve as the only youth-led delegation under 16 at HLPF today. My question is, how do we codify youth influence into legal and institutional architecture of policymaking so that engagement is not contingent on age, credentials, or tokenism, but on the merit of our proposals and the urgency of our stake? Until then, youth inclusion risks remaining a well-packaged performance without enforceable consequence or democratic parity. Thank you.
Really appreciate that question. Thank you. Dr. Patil, I might ask you if you'd be open to responding to that question. And it's actually interesting because it touches on some themes that we had already started addressing, but perhaps you could dive into that further.
Of course. I think I would like to roll back on that question a little bit before I actually get to answering it. There are more than 300 young people at this HLPF, which at least in recent years is the biggest number of young people in the room. And as much as I'd like to think that we are in a stage where we can, with data, start quantifying or start translating how much of young people's input has actually translated into action or into strategic changes within policy documents, I don't think we really have that data. But what we do have is the recognition that there is a young person in every room, which is so much different than how things were just a few years ago when I came into this space. Within this 300 people cohort, we have people from all kinds of backgrounds. We have people with disabilities. We have people from marginalized communities. We have children whose accreditation at some point was officially not possible a few years back. So we have made a lot of progress. And you also spoke about trust, which I wanted to comment on earlier, but I'm going to use the space to do that. And I think as a doctor, it's really critical, the word trust for me. And when I come from a clinic in rural India to a UN space, the definition of trust more or less remains the same. And that is something we're struggling to build between young people and decision makers currently. So the way I see it is it's something that can be very easily built, but also very easily broken. In terms of my experience, I see it being made or broken at the doorstep of my health facility. So it really, young people judge the state of policies not on paper. And I think that applies to just the broader human race. When you talk about how effective a policy is or how relevant it is to you, it is not based on the text that you see on a paper, but whether my pain as a young person is heard, whether my needs are met, and whether my rights are respected. So when we talk about that from a youth perspective, can I say that the answer to all of those questions are a yes? No. But are we coming to a place, or are we trying to push as a generation to come inside spaces where we may not be welcomed, to make our voice heard? Yes. And I think for me, particularly, I also want to take this space to talk about the plight of young health workers in the global south.
We have 30 seconds before we wrap up, so I'd love to hear from you very briefly.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So in this generation, we are dealing with, for just giving my own example here, at 23, I had to learn to shut my feelings down and tell families that I cannot take their mother in because there are not enough beds in the hospital. I learned at 25 that 120 hours a week with barely any compensation was okay. I learned at 26, clothes in my hospital that were meant for doctors might not fit a woman's structure. So we are a generation that has lived through these realities. And that is what we bring to the table. And can I put a data or an indicator or a number to what that contribution translates into in these spaces? I don't think I will have that skill in this lifetime.
But a great example of how individuals in this room, and as you mentioned as well, everyone in this room, everyone joining us virtually has the capacity to continue this conversation, to have a new conversation based on what they've heard today, and to be a catalyst of change themselves. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to our panelists. Great question. Thank you so much for folks joining us virtually. We really appreciate it. We have another discussion coming up in just a moment, but before we get to that, let's jump into another poll. So if you check out your screen on the slider, you will see another poll that is popping up, which is, which one do you think is the most urgent priority for us to be able to accelerate social progress and restore trust in institutions? So please let us know your perspective in the poll. We really value your perspective. We're going to take a quick look at a video, and then we'll come back for another panel conversation.
It is so decided.
In 2015, world leaders made a promise for the well-being of all people and the planet.
We need action
to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. There's progress in life expectancy and disease prevention. There's greater gender parity in management positions. Many developing economies have seen a growing middle class. Safe sanitation and basic hygiene services are becoming the norm. More than 95% of the global population have access to mobile broadband networks. The future of energy is cleaner. Unfortunately, at the halfway point, only 15% of SDG targets are on track, and more than a third are stagnated or in regression. More than 780 million people face chronic hunger. More than 100 million families are fleeing war, conflict, and human rights violations. Social protection, education, and healthcare are still out of reach for too many. Human rights are under assault. With the planet warming at 1.1 degrees Celsius, extreme weather is wreaking devastation around the world. Biodiversity is being lost at an alarming rate. These global threats must be overcome with smarter solutions, renewed ambition and determination, and recognition of what has not succeeded in the past. We must commit investments from billions to trillions in increasing social protection and decent jobs, transforming education, digitalization, energy transition, food system transition, and environmental protection. To get there, we need global solidarity for the planet, for people, for generations to come.
No excuses, no delays. Promises made must be promises kept. Made must be promises kept.
No excuses, no delays. Now we know what we have to do to get there. Let's take a listen to what you all think as well. We'll take a look at the poll now with those results that have been coming through. Super interesting. Everyone is pretty much agreed that expanding access to healthcare, education, and social protection is what folks believe is the #1 priority. And of course, transparency in decision making and strengthening public participation, which we heard an allusion to earlier today in the panel about, the focus on youth and them being genuinely included in the conversation and not siloed to one side. So really appreciate you continuing to participate virtually in the room today as well via Slido and on the chat facilities. We are excited to have your perspectives included in today's conversation too. We will take another question later from Slido, so please keep those questions coming through. But now let's meet our next panel of guest experts for this conversation on decent work, well-being, and shared prosperity. I am really excited to join with me today some amazing experts who are going to share their perspectives. We have Jose Manuel Salazar Chirinox joining us. Thank you so much for being here. The Executive Secretary of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. We're also excited to have Björg Sandekir here, a UN Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination, UN DESA. Thank you so much. And also, Narichi Kakani is here as well, a professor from the Graduate School of Media and Governance at Keio University. He's also a member of the independent group of scientists that produced the Global Sustainability Development Report back in 2023. And also, we have another guest joining us virtually. A huge welcome to Jayati Ghosh, a professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She's also a member of the UN High-Level Advisory Board on Economic and Social Affairs. Very excited for this conversation. And we're going to focus today on blended finance as a way to align investment and measurable SDG outcomes, particularly for low and middle income countries. So, ASG, if I could start with you, if that's okay, what is the main message of the 2025 edition of the World Social Report?
Thank you. The main message, and I brought a copy of the report here, of the World Social Report. I don't know if people can see it online. It's worth looking up. It's available on our website. The main message of the World Social Report is, well, first of all, there has been some progress since 1995, and I think it's important for us to underscore that, because we do mainly talk about the challenges, and there are lots of challenges to talk about. But let's not forget that there has been progress since I actually went online for the first time at the Civil Society Forum in Copenhagen at the Social Summit. So a lot has happened in those 30 years. But the main message is around, I don't know, we have a slide. I don't know if that will be made available to,
We will be bringing that up in a second.
to people. But the main message is around how many societies are caught in a vicious cycle of precarious and unstable employment. And I think that's something that's come up in the previous panel as well. So we have the precarious employment that many find themselves in. That links to economic insecurity. That links again to staggering levels of inequality. It links to declining trust and polarization. And that vicious cycle strains the foundation of social cohesion in societies, but it also strains the foundation of multilateralism and trust here at the United Nations, and our ability to get together as nations and come to important agreements, such as the agreement that was made in Copenhagen in 95. And if we leave that vicious cycle unaddressed, we fear that it will further erode social and political stability. So that's one of the key messages of that of the World Social Report. We did a poll as part of the data that informs the report that found that more than half of the global population do not trust their governments. So when we have that kind of mistrust between the populations and the governments or institutions that are there to serve the people, we erode social cohesion, and that again strains social development.
Really appreciate you sharing those top line takeaways from the report. Executive Secretary, if I could turn to you, you used to work for the central bank in Costa Rica many moons ago, and you're a Minister for Foreign Trade in Costa Rica as well. So I'd love your take on how does decent work help to restore public trust and social stability, particularly during times of economic uncertainty?
Yes, thank you very much. Central Bank for some 3 years, but I was never the president of Central Bank. But anyway, I was Minister of Foreign Trade of Costa Rica. Look, I think I'm really glad that this is part of the conversation, because normally, and in different positions I've had, I worked for 14 years at the ILO and so on, there was all this emphasis, which is very good, it's excellent, on social protection, on social policies. Now in ECLAC, of course, we have a major division and we work a lot on that, and we have been preparing position documents for governments, for our own, on Qatar, and we have a lot of, conversations. But I would like to use my few minutes to really emphasize that we shouldn't forget that the whole of the SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth. And I think this is, I know it's sensitive, particularly in an audience that is mostly, focused on social policies and reduction of poverty and so on. But frankly, and we're putting a lot of emphasis in ECLAC on the economic growth and transformation. It's not just growth per se or just a GDP thing. It's the fact that, and let me illustrate it with the case of Latin America and the Caribbean. We see the region in 3 development traps, and the first trap is a trap of low capacity to grow. The second is a high inequality, low social mobility, weak social cohesion, and the third one is one of institutional weakness and complex governance. Okay, there's no time to talk about all of that now, but I want to refer to the first trap. The figures are eloquent. Between 2014 and 23, 10 years, a decade, the average growth was only 0.9%, and this is less than 2% of the average growth of the region in the famous or infamous lost decade of the 80s. Now, the problem is that behind a 1% or 0.9 rate of growth, you don't have transformations. It's very difficult to reduce poverty. It's very difficult to reduce informality. It's very difficult to improve fiscal space, because then the tax income and revenues, become quite small growth, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not an economicist distortion to insist on economic growth. Is that behind, if countries are growing at 3, 4, 5%, 5 looks like a pipe dream these days, you really facilitate the environment for many things. I mean, the other thing is that reflection on this, talking about social outcomes and social policy, there are 2 stairways, not to heaven, but 2 stairways to to social mobility, simplifying, right? One is a dynamic labor market. And the other is a high quality education and vocational training system. There are other things, many more. This is simplifying, of course. But again, you don't have a dynamic labor market with economic rates of growth of 1 or 2%. I mean, you really need more growth. Of course, you can talk about, and it's very important, that it is broad-based growth. It is high quality, sectors. With all the modern characteristics and so on. It's not just growth of, any sector. There's a very important conversation. So to finalize, my point is that, when we talk about decent work and job creation, we cannot forget the demand side. And I think we still are very much in a paradigm of treating these issues in silos, where you have social policy on the one hand, and you have, unfortunately, even the productive development policies, many countries have been very timid. They don't, because economies have done a lot of damage with this discussion. What is the role of the state? What is the role of the private sector and the Washington consensus and the neoliberal thing and so on? So you have a lot of zigzagging. I think now, after the experience of even the industrial policy in the United States, with the CHIPS Act and with this, there is clear that the major in the new geopolitics, the major powers are doing industrial policies. Some smarter, some not so smart. But the fact is that there should be no doubt that developing countries need to do productive development policies. There's a whole new paradigm on how to do it, and that this is essential because there's no way that social policies alone, as important as they are, can do all the heavy lifting for all these terrible figures that we have about unemployment and the size of the informal economy being 50% on average in Latin America.
I appreciate that. And I'd like to bring in Professor Ghosh now to continue some of the points that you've raised. You're an economist and you advise governments, and I wonder how you think about decent work, especially in terms of the current global conflicts and how we can expect nations to prioritize this given conflict and economic hardship. Love your take on this.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but it's great to follow Jose Manuel because he said a lot of the things that I would have said. And I want to take off specifically on this issue of transformation and employment. Because, in fact, while I completely agree about all the things that were said about poverty reduction, you cannot do that without economic transformation and without generating good quality work. And we know the challenges. We know the trade uncertainties, the debt stress, the fiscal constraints, the climate change, the absence of food security, the new technologies that are reducing the possibilities for employment, the demographic changes, in a context of very high informality and in regions like my own, South Asia, very extensive unpaid labor. So I would argue that if we really are serious about SDG 8, we really have to think of an entirely different approach to it. We have to change our strategy. And that really means, yes, as Jose Manuel said, going for industrial policy, but an industrial policy that is valid for the 21st century, which means a bunch of things. It means, for example, stop focusing on export-led growth alone. It's not going to be enough anymore. We know that. I mean, it's certainly not just in the short term, but even in the medium term. Less reliance on foreign capital and aid. And here, I think, the whole obsession with blended finance is very important. Yes, private finance is important, but private finance tends to follow. It tends to go into countries that are already growing. And the experience of China is absolutely instructive in this matter. Where you have large public investment, where you have a large engagement of the state in economic transformation, you will find private finance flocking in. They will be waiting at the door for you. You don't have to do special incentives of any kind for them. We also have now recognized that these debt-driven cycles that developing countries have been going through endlessly have to end. And that really means that we have to rely more on domestic resources. So I would put jobs and inequality as the two big issues, unlike what the Slido survey seemed to suggest. For me, the big issues are actually job creation, good quality job creation, and inequality reduction. And that inequality reduction is not just about shared prosperity. It's also about reducing the obscene wealth inequalities, the obscene high degree of, the 1%ers and the 5%ers in all our economies, because that kind of wealth generates power, which in turn generates economic policies that have brought us to the path that we're in. And the reduction of inequality is also critical as an industrial policy. It generates a mass domestic market for consumption goods that gives you economies of scale. Once again, China gave us an example of how this is done. So taxation, fiscal policies that are progressive, taxation of the ultra-rich, of multinational corporations that currently pay a fraction of the taxes that domestic companies pay. All of these are essential parts of a broader transformation that really we have to do if we want to generate the good jobs. And that would give us the possibility of the public revenues that we could spend on health, on education, which incidentally are also big job creators. I argue that the economies of the future are going to rely on care activities and creative activities more and more for employment generation, because manufacturing is not going to give us the kind of employment that it did before. So really, I think this requires a change of course. And to do that kind of bold change of course, we require coalitions. Whether or not we can do this completely multilaterally, I think FFD in Sevilla and other things have demonstrated that yes, some kind of multilateralism is still possible. But Sevilla also emphasized the importance of coalitions. And I think more and more developing countries, if they really are serious about SDG 8, will have to be thinking about coalitions for the kinds of strategies that I've mentioned. Thanks.
Really appreciate that. And if you haven't already read the World Social Report, I really encourage you to take a look at that. Some super interesting data points coming out of that. And if you're joining us on Zoom, there will be a link to that report in just a moment as well. Transformation has been mentioned by all of our speakers, and climate shock is another transformation that we're seeing happening around the world. Professor Carney, sustainable development is your expertise. I'd love to understand from you, like, how do you think we can align economic growth with environmental justice, and can they actually coexist?
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to echo the importance of transformation, as you also mentioned and Professor Joss also mentioned. In the 2023 GSDR, Global Sustainable Development Report, we came up with a model of transformation in which we divided transformation into 3 stages for people to easy to understand what the process of transformation would be. And those 3 stages are starting with emergence of transformation, where lots of startups doing some test and doing some startup business, and starting point of lots of opportunities exist there. And then going into acceleration phase, where policy intervention may be taking place, or also the social norm could be changed. And then finally going into stabilization phase. So we consider those 3 different stages for transformation as important areas. And lots of things are happening at the bottom level, doing new business, especially from younger people, trying to be innovative to directly address the goals or targets embedded in sustainable development goals. So those are existing, but what are missing is acceleration. Policy backups, as also mentioned earlier, subsidies or tax incentives or investment. Those are missing part. So we encourage policymakers to step into those actions towards transformation. And that is also necessary in combining climate change, for example, with decent work or poverty eradication. And those are missing. And at the same time, when we look at the existing governmental structure, there are also embedded interests in there. And it is, even though we recommend for change, it is also quite difficult to change transformatively, depending on the countries, but it's generally quite difficult. So we also advised to change the level of transformation, shifting from national level to regional level or to local level, in order to maneuver the transformation in a different context. So, for example, in the local level, back in Japan, there's a scheme called SDG Future Cities, where government provide funding for local governments to initiate transformation or to support transformative change towards overcoming silos and doing some innovative projects. There are already around 230 projects going on. We are facing the aging problems, and we are facing many shortage of laborers in rural society. So changing that direction and starting with the transformation at local level is something that our government is trying to do. So this is one example, but changing the level of action and level of governance may be one solution to forge the transformative change.
From a macro to a more...
To more local, or from national to regional or global.
Okay, super interesting. Assistant Secretary General, I'd love to kind of unpack that a little further and also maybe jump into some other tangible examples and insights of where you've seen like actual policy work and what we could learn from that and potentially roll out elsewhere as well.
Thank you. I realized in my opening, in my first intervention, I focused more on the challenges. So it's great to be able to move to what we can actually do. And there is some great analysis, again, back to the World Social Report, but also work that we do at DESA, the regional commissions we've heard from ECLAC, we heard from ECE earlier. It's great to have them here as well. So the recommendations from our side is to have policy making with a social lens. So again, looking across sectors, not looking at each sector in isolation, but bringing that social lens to policy making at in different sectors. Number one, what does that mean? First, invest more and better in people. So that first, in the poll, the point that got the majority of the votes is actually our first recommendation of what we call policy making with the social lens, investing in health and education, in everything that has to do with people. The second recommendation when we talk about policy making with a social lens was also part of that point in the poll, universal access to social protection, but social protection that is adequate. We see in a number of countries that there are different types of social protection policies and schemes in place, but they may not be targeted enough or well enough adjusted to the needs of that particular population, or just simply not enough. So that's important. And the last one is a point that came very low on the poll, and that is how you finance all of this. And we've talked about economic growth and we've talked about taxation. We just had a great meeting in Sevilla that was Professor Ghosh, I think, mentioned that earlier, about how do we finance development. And I also think that was a great example of how we are able at this moment as countries of the world in the auspices of the UN to get together and make quite transformative agreements. I think the Financing for Development outcome document proves that, and it includes mention of how we also need to make sure that we increase the redistributive powers of taxation. So those three things, the policy making with a social lens, to invest more and better in people, health, education, and so on, to make sure that you have adequate social protection that actually does what it's supposed to do, and finally that we redistribute through taxation systems. There's much more on that in the report. I won't be able to expand on that much here, but there is a lot that we can do. So we see that there are challenges, but of course, I mean, we need to have that hope with us that policy making works. It makes a difference what decisions policymakers make, and it makes a difference when we get together as coalitions to affect that transformation and that change that we are looking for.
Holding on to that hope, I appreciate that you raised that. I want to actually jump to a question, because there's a question that's come through. Excuse me. That relates to what you were saying, actually. And Professor Ghosh, I'd love to bring you into this because it speaks in some ways to blended finance. It's from a gentleman in Brisbane, Australia, Rob McKerney. The question is around sustainably and systemically supporting not-for-profits who enable SDG implementation in a cost-efficient way. And I wonder if you have some thoughts on this, because we heard, some sort of allusions to that just prior, but I would love your perspective on this, and what role do we have to kind of work together to achieve those goals in the next 5 years?
Oh, I think there's no doubt that there's a huge role for civil society organizations. So yes, I'm all for supporting as many of these and social movements and trade unions and other groups that are trying to do the kinds of work that are required. And I certainly don't want, sort of state control and public control over all of these different things. So I completely agree with all of this. State support of civil society, which is something that has been declining very dramatically. And in fact, in most countries, we see it happening the other way. We see much more control and attempted control over NGOs and CSOs. We see much more attempts by countries, especially in the developing world, by governments to actually monitor their activities, prevent them from being a proper voice for different kinds of people who would otherwise be voiceless. And I think that's the trend that really has to be reversed. Social policy has to be something that engages and is inclusive of the people, which means they must have a voice. And we find more and more governments actually trying to suppress those different voices, unfortunately. So yeah, I completely agree with that need.
I want to, Executive Secretary, I'd love your perspective on this as well, about policy levers. In the context of what we've been talking about today, what do you think can be done in terms of promoting economic security, especially for informal public sector workers? Informal sector workers, like what do you think can be done from that perspective too? And what are some of those policy levers that you're seeing that are being rolled out successfully that are promoting that economic security piece?
Yes. Well, I think, the first to recognize is that the challenge of the informal sector is very difficult. We work a lot. I worked 14 years in the ILO, and I was in charge of the discussions within the ILO and with others and between employers and so on the informal sector was the whole issue of employment. We have Peru, which is in Latin America, one of the countries that has the most developed. Some people have become famous with books like Hernando de Soto, in Peru, the most developed debate about informality, and yet the highest rate of informality in Latin America, beyond 70%. Now there are a lot of things, there are a lot of lessons. ILO has even it's not a convention, a recommendation on the informal economy. Look, we did actually, I edited a book in 2018 with a colleague where we had seen that there were a number of episodes of reduction of informality and growth of formality in Latin America. And the period which we studied 11 episodes of, informality reduction. And to see, and we had a number of authors and specialists in the experience and so on. Of course, this was from the period 2000 to 2013. This was the golden age. And to no surprise, the factor out of, a list of factors that had most moved the needles was the fact that there was a very high and sustained economic growth in those 12, 13 years.
Right.
In terms of formality, in terms of good job creation and so on. That is important. That's not to say, and that's a hugely important conversation about many other things that have been tried and that can work. Like, for instance, special, the monotributo, the single tax for micro enterprises. It moves the needles. There's a lot of evidence. It doesn't really in the aggregate, but it in the margin, it is very helpful. Is this idea that you can, if the cost of informality is very high and a lot of small, medium-sized enterprises, micro cannot really pay that cost. So if you make just one tax, which is low, and you consolidate everything and you facilitate and you make payment easy, then this could be as a stairway, I don't know why I'm talking so much about stairways today, but anyway, as a stairway to climb. And so that works. Of course, in terms, you have to recognize that informality is a matter of, you can see this as a phenomenon of small enterprises, but just occupations that are informal. So for instance, the legal frameworks, when the ILO approved the convention and was ratified by many countries on domestic work, it actually moved a lot. I mean, Latin America, it tremendously, the amount of that, this was one of the most informal, like more than 90% of domestic employees were informal, and with countries that ratified the convention and put labor inspection. You have to also have labor inspection.
Sure.
So that is a powerful combination. So I think there is, and I could go on, there's a whole checklist of things depending on occupations, depending on, what is enterprise. And then finally, of course, social protection. I mean, the main, I'm going to the root of your question, the main insecurity for informal workers is, it's not so much they have a job, it's informal. Well, some jobs are not such good quality, others are better, even within the informality. But the common thing is they don't have social protection.
Right.
So to the extent that there could be extensions of focalized social protection. But of course, and with this I end, the problem, and Santiago Levy is someone who has pointed out this very strongly with the social protection systems in Latin America, is that they are all mostly financed by taxes on payroll.
Right.
And the payroll is only 50% of the employment. So, I mean, we have this architectural problem of trying to finance informality, which is 50, 60%, based on just the formal. So that makes, very expensive the financing, the payroll, the contracting. So anyway, that's a big conversation, but it's a conversation that I think must be had.
Well, I appreciate that. And Professor Carney, I'd love to bring you into this as well because of the work that you did on the Global Sustainability Development Report as well, in terms of policy levers. But we've actually had a question that's come through, so I'd love to put this one to you, which was particularly about how can young people support the acceleration of decoupling economic growth and environmental injustice? I wonder your thoughts around the policy levers that could be adjusted to address this question that has been upvoted quite a few times. Josephine, thank you so much for sending that through. How can we support the acceleration phase on decoupling economic growth and environmental injustice?
Thank you. Well, it's quite difficult question, but I think one of the things that we can go forward, and also my students, for example, are interested, is to turn waste into resources. So there are lots of waste existing in our society, especially in society like Japan. Lots of food waste problems, and also these clothes are thrown away after a couple of wearing. And students, young people are getting to be interested in utilizing those as a material. So recycling requires some cost, but turning waste into the resource doesn't cost much, or even that creates some benefits. We have, there are startup companies just starting in Japan to circulate, to collect the clothes that are used and using the social network to provide that to those who need it. And that business is going quite well these days. So that is one example, but other example also exist in the food waste business. I mean, burning waste is also costful, but turning that into the resources creates some
you.